Welcome to this explainer, everyone. Today, we're going to do something really exciting. We are peeling back the layers of, arguably, the absolute most famous football player on the planet. And listen, we aren't just going to sit here and list off goals or count trophies. Nah, we're looking at the intense, almost unbelievable expectations and contradictions that totally define his career. We're going to explore a phenomenon that has literally fascinated the football world for 2 whole decades.
Okay, let's dive into this. How does one human being carry the weight of an entire nation's sporting destiny? Just think about that for a second. It's a staggering question to ask, isn't it? But for 20 years, that has been the everyday reality for Lionel Messi. It's this massive, almost suffocating burden placed squarely on the shoulders of just one single athlete. Imagine waking up every single day knowing an entire country's hopes, all its frustrations, and its deeply complex relationship with success all rest entirely on your performance. Wild, right? And honestly, that perfectly illustrates what we call the Messi Paradox. It's this incredible, almost pulling tension between his absolutely unmatched individual brilliance, some truly fascinating statistical anomalies in his game, and of course, those impossibly heavy global expectations we just talked about. To really wrap our heads around this, we're going to break it down into 3 distinct layers. We've got the societal myth that surrounded him for years, the surprising data anomaly that kind of defines his style of play, and finally, the philosophical legacy he's building right at this very moment.
So let's jump right into layer 1, carrying a nation's destiny.
For years, his role for Argentina was never ever just about being a guy on a pitch playing a game. He basically became the living, breathing embodiment of his country's sporting dreams. Every single pass, every shot he took, it was weighed against the historical frustrations of a nation just absolutely desperate for glory. He was literally demanded to single-handedly pull an entire squad to victory. And fans and the global media just continuously piled this completely unfair expectation on him, completely ignoring how the sport actually works. It's a team game, right? But the narrative demanded that one man somehow bypass the entire team dynamic. And you can imagine, this creates a pretty massive psychological burden. We see this incredibly stubborn societal myth of individual brilliance, being expected to just, magically fix systemic dysfunction. The core of this first myth is this really stubborn belief that one player's singular genius could always overcome a completely broken or struggling team system. If the team failed, well, the global conversation rarely blamed the systemic dysfunction. Instead, it pointed the finger straight at the individual brilliance for not being, brilliant enough. It's just an incredibly heavy psychological burden to place on any modern sports icon.
Let's move to and see how this builds into layer 2, the penalty spot anomaly.
So let's shift our focus away from the societal myths for a second and dive straight into the hard, really fascinating data of his career on the pitch. Now, Messi possesses this almost alien ability to manipulate the ball in open play with just instinctive, completely fluid movement. His unmatched dominance really comes from this exact trait. When the game is in motion, he just seamlessly weaves through the tightest, most disciplined defenses in the world. It's honestly like he sees the pitch in an entirely different dimension, anticipating movements way before they even happen.
Now, what's really interesting about this side is the statistical pivot here. Notice that 77.3% penalty conversion rate. For any normal player, hey, that is absolutely world-class. But we're talking about Messi here. Historically, when he's placed on the penalty spot, he's actually struggled to reach the absolute elite tier of clinical finishers. Which begs the question, why on earth would a player who is capable of such absolute magic and open play have a statistical dip in literally the easiest scoring opportunity in the entire game?
Well, breaking down the psychology behind the penalty spot explains it pretty perfectly. We're looking at fluid chaos and moving variables on one side versus static silence and analytical play on the other. See, Messi thrives in chaos. His genius relies on this constant, incredibly rapid assessment of moving variables. Defenders shifting around, teammates making runs, the ball bouncing unpredictably. But a penalty kick, it fundamentally interrupts all of that. It isolates the player in a moment of perfect, static composure. The sheer silence of the penalty spot actually removes the very chaos he uses to his advantage. It basically shows us that his brain is entirely wired for dynamic problem solving, not for isolated analytical execution.
Which brings us to layer 3, the paradox of proximity.
Let's step back a bit and zoom out from all that granular data to explore the broader, more philosophical side of his legacy and really where his career stands today. 46. I just want that number to sink in for a second. 46. That is his total number of career honors. It's a staggeringly high figure that absolutely, without even a shadow of a doubt, cements his place in football history. Honestly, any debate about his greatness, it's pretty much settled by this single metric alone.
And these numbers were capped off by some massive, massive recent milestones. We're talking the elusive 2022 World Cup victory and a record-extending 8th Ballon d'Or. Insane, right? But following these incredible, absolute peak moments, he made a really pivotal choice. He moved away from traditional European football. He actually stepped out of that intense, suffocating spotlight that had tracked his literally every single move for 2 solid decades.
Now, this move represents a really profound trade-off. On the one hand, stepping away from Europe has granted him a different kind of longevity. It's preserving his health and his passion for the game in a much less pressurized environment. But on the other hand, it's created a sense of distance for global fans. I mean, for years, millions of people basically structured their entire weeks around watching him dominate the peak of the sport at Barcelona, and that immediate, week-in, week-out connection, well, that's changed.
Which brings us to this incredibly fascinating reality. He is arguably the single most recognizable athlete on the entire planet, yet he no longer defines the daily emotional rhythm of European football. And this right here is the new tension of his career. He's fully transitioned into a global ambassador for the sport. He is universally famous, absolutely universally respected, but geographically and competitively distant from the sport's traditional center.
And that leaves us with a truly compelling final thought. As a global ambassador, does physical distance diminish a legend's daily impact, or does it finally free him from the paradox? Does stepping away from that daily European grind actually liberate him from the impossible expectations we discussed way back in our first layer? It really challenges us to rethink how we consume modern sports icons and the heavy, heavy burdens we place upon them. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'm going to leave you to ponder that question.